All right, Genesis chapter 41. Genesis 41. I know we sent out the alert, but I know sometimes it doesn't get to everybody, or sometimes it doesn't come across. I get people telling me all the time that the messages on the phone alert isn't very clear. And I don't know why it is for some and why it isn't for others. Because I'll sit there and I'll listen to it, and I'm like, well, it came through fine for me. The only thing I notice is it'll repeat itself. Some of us can hear, some of us can't. Mine, it'll start to go, and then all of a sudden, about 5 seconds in, it'll go back to the beginning and start all over again. So, yeah, mine does that almost all the time. So, it's a fickle system, but right now it's what we got. But Pastor Griswood of yeah. And I've tried sending text messages because I know a lot of folks have cell phones, but then those that don't, the text message doesn't come out very clear when the machine because it'll be machine read then, and those aren't always the greatest to listen to. So, but Pastor Griswood of Lakewood Baptist Church passed away this Sunday after the morning service, and so they have asked if they could use our facilities. We're going to be hosting the funeral here on Saturday morning. Their church just isn't big enough to hold all the people that they expect a lot of people to come, and the funeral home isn't large enough either. So they're going to be having it here on Saturday at 11 o'clock. So just kind of letting you folks know. 68. Very unexpected. I don't. No inclination that there were any problems, and preached his last message. And Brother Corey Jackson was telling me, he always said that's how he wanted to go. He wanted to essentially die. He said he wanted to die in the pulpit. Well, he got to finish the last message that God had him preach, and then he didn't go right away, but he was in the hospital, and a couple hours later he went. So God took him. Appointed unto man wants to die. We never know when it's our time. 68. Yeah, he didn't. Genesis 41. We're gonna read through the whole chapter because this story just kind of flows. So we'll bear with me as I read along, follow along, try to see if you can find some things to get from it. We'll kind of look at Joseph here. Joseph, and it's his rise to Pharaoh's right hand today. So, verse 1, it says, "And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river. And behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine and fat-fleshed, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and stood by the other kine upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and lean-fleshed kine did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kine. So Pharaoh awoke, and he slept and dreamed the second time, and behold, 7 ears of corn came up upon one stalk, rank and good. And behold, 7 thin ears and blasted with the east wind sprung up after them. And the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt, and all the wise men thereof. And Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. Then spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. Pharaoh was wroth with his servants, had put me in ward in the captain of the guard's house, both me and the chief baker. And we dreamed a dream in one night, I and he. We dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream. And there was there with us a young man, an Hebrew, servant to the captain of the guard. And we told him, and he interpreted to us our dreams. To each man according to his dream he did interpret. And it came to pass, as he interpreted to us, so it was. Me he restored unto mine office, and him he hanged. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon, and he shaved himself, and changed his raiment, and came in unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, In my dream, behold, I stood by the bank of the river. And behold, there came up out of the river 7 kine, fat-fleshed and well-favored, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them, poor and ill-favored and lean-fleshed, such as I never saw in all the land of Egypt for badness. And the lean and the ill-favored kine did eat up the first 7 fat kine. And when they had eaten them up, it would not be known that they had eaten them, but they were still ill-favored as at the beginning. So I awoke. And I saw in my dream, and behold, 7 ears came up in one stalk, full and good. And behold, 7 ears withered, thin, and blasted with the east wind, sprung up after them. And the thin ears devoured the 7 good ears. And I told this unto the magicians, but there was none that could declare it to me. And Joseph said unto Pharaoh, The dream of Pharaoh is one. God has showed Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good ears are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one, and the 7 thin and ill-favored kine that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears blasted with the east wind shall be 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he showeth unto Pharaoh. Behold, there come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. And there shall arise after them 7 years of famine, and all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. And the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of that famine following, for it shall be very grievous. And for that the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice. It is because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Now therefore let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. So let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up the 5th part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years, and let them gather all the food of those good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities, and that food shall be for store to the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land perish not through the famine. And the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh, and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, Can we find such a one as this is, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, Forasmuch as God has showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my house. According unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand, and put it upon Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vesture of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. And he made him to ride in the 2nd chariot which he had, and they cried before him, Bow the knee! And he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paaneah, and he gave him to wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. And Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh, and went throughout all the land of Egypt. And in the 7 plenteous years the earth brought forth by handfuls. And he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities, and food of the field which was round about every city laid he up in the same. And Joseph gathered corn as the sand of the sea, very much, until he left numbering, for it was without number. And unto Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of famine came, which Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bare unto him. And Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for God, said he, hath made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. And the name of the second called he Ephraim, for God hath caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. And the 7 years of plenteousness that was in the land of Egypt were ended. And the 7 years of dearth began to come, according as Joseph has said. And the dearth was in all lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. And when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said unto all the Egyptians, Go unto Joseph, what he saith to you do. And the famine was over all the face of the earth. And Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold unto the Egyptians. And the famine waxed sore in the land of Egypt. And all countries came into Egypt to buy to Joseph for to buy corn, because that the famine was so sore in all the land. And if this was Hollywood, that would be the end of the movie right there. They would end it right there, because Joseph just rose up to second, headship in Egypt, and a wonderful time. What a change for Joseph from the beginning of this chapter to the end of this chapter. He leaves that prison house expecting to go back to it, never to return. He didn't know what was in store for him. He finally got a good shave. We know the Jewish people, they grow their beards out. I don't know if Joseph was able to maintain his or not, but we know that he had to shave in order to come before Pharaoh. And just, my goodness, he leaves the prison house and then just rises up. But Pharaoh here at the beginning has these weird dreams. He's sitting there dreaming. He's sitting there at the bank of the river. I'm imagining it's the Nile River, and out comes 7 kine out of the river. Which, I'm thinking about it, like, if all of a sudden they just came out from the water, that would be kind of odd. And they're, really good-looking cattle, and they're just grazing, and they're, big and healthy, and then all of a sudden 7 ill-favored ones show up and devour the good ones, but nothing changes to them. They still look bad. They still look ill. They still don't look nourished. And then he has the same with corn. 7 good ears of corn spring up, big and full and luscious. And then 7 bad ears spring up, and they devour the good ears, and they still look pitiful. And so he doesn't know what to do. He goes, calls his wise men. And I was studying this. I was wondering, look there in verse 9. Here he is with the wise men. Says, Then the chief butler spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying. I got wondering, what is the chief butler doing there? He's the guy that, makes sure his drink is good and prepared. I don't know, maybe Pharaoh got thirsty and said, Hey, call the chief butler. I need a drink because you guys are wearing me out. Nobody knows how to interpret my dream. But it just so happens that, it just so happens the chief butler's there, right? And he comes along and he gives Pharaoh drink and realizes, oh, I know a guy that can answer that dream. And proceeds to tell Pharaoh, hey, there's a guy in prison that can answer this dream for you. And Joseph arrives and he interprets for Pharaoh. Go to Proverbs chapter 3. I think up to this point, this Proverbs 3 has some verses in here that give a good description of Joseph and kind of what he's gone through, what he's done. Proverbs 3 and verse 1, it says, My son, forget not my law, but let thine heart keep my commandments. For length of days and long life and peace shall they add to thee. Let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Bind them about thy neck, write them upon the table of thine heart. My son, keep my commandments. Length of days and long life. Joseph made sure to keep the commandments of God, right? We see him throughout. It's up to this point, man, he's tried to live a righteous life. Whether it was at home with dad, whether it was as a slave, whether it was in the prison house, he's tried to live a righteous life. And God has prolonged his days. He's for length of days and long life and peace shall they add to thee. Verses 3 and 4, let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Bind them about thy neck, write them upon the table of thine heart. So shalt thou find favor and good understanding in the sight of God and man. What's the common theme we see in Joseph's life so far? God gives him favor, and he gets favor with man. He's sold into Potiphar's house, and God shows favor upon Joseph, and also he gets favor upon Potiphar. Potiphar, he rises up through Potiphar's house. Potiphar puts him in charge of everything. Now, you say, oh, Potiphar turned his back on him. Well, he got lied to. Joseph was accused of doing something that maybe to Potiphar was unimaginable. I don't know, but he had to do something about it. He couldn't just let it lie. He had to take care of something. So Joseph's cast into prison, but even there, the keeper of the prison house, he shows favor upon Joseph, and he gives Joseph some leniency. Joseph, he obviously has some roam of the prison house. He's not stuck in a cell, because he's the one who checks on all the other prisoners. He can't leave the prison house, but he checks on the other prisoners. And then here in chapter 41, he gets favor from Pharaoh. Well, if he's getting favor from God and man, that tells me he had mercy and truth that he didn't forsake. Joseph himself made sure to be a truthful man. He favored truth, but then he also was a merciful man. He was balanced. We see the mercy he showed to the two men with their dream. He could tell there was something wrong. Well, he wanted to help them, so he said, hey, man, what's going on, guys? What's the matter? Why are you so down? Now, the one man he had bad news for, that wasn't Joseph's fault. That was God's leading, telling him what to do. But the other man he had good news for. But Joseph was a merciful and a truthful man. Those two things were evident in his life. And so he found favor with God and man. Look at verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy path. He trusted God with his life. For 13 years, nothing probably seemed to make sense. Joseph gets dragged down to Egypt, stolen, sold as a slave. So he's a slave for Potiphar. I don't know how long he was a slave for Potiphar. We do know that he was after meeting the butler and the baker, he was in the prison for 2 more years. So we know at least he was in there for 3 years, probably more. So my guess is he may have been in there for 5 years. I don't know exactly the amount of time, but that 13-year span, he was either a slave or he was in the prison. But Joseph allowed God to keep directing. God directed his path. He trusted in the Lord, didn't lean on his own understanding. Because as we see, Joseph didn't just try to, could he have tried to escape from Potiphar? Why not? That's what a slave typically does, right? Man, let's try to find a way to get out. Could he have escaped from the prison? I don't know, but people try to do that. Man, Joseph had some liberties. He had some he had a few more liberties than what the other prisoners had, so he may have tried, he could have tried to escape if he wanted to, but he just trusted in God. And didn't lean on his own understanding. He trusted God to say what needed to be said. Go back to Genesis. Hold your finger here in Proverbs. We'll be back. Look in Genesis 41. Joseph, in verse 25, proceeds to tell Pharaoh the dream interpretation. Okay? And he tells him, hey, this is what the cows mean. This is what the corn means. This is what's happening. You're going to have 7 good years of plenty. Going to be amazing. But then you're going to have 7 years of famine and dearth. I mean, it's going to be so bad, the 7 good years are going to get forgotten. And if you look at verse 32, it says, and for that the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice. It is because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. If Joseph ended right here, did he do everything Pharaoh asked of him?
Yes.
Yeah.
He interpreted.
Exactly. He interpreted the dream. Pharaoh didn't ask for anything other than, what is this interpretation? But instead, Joseph goes really above and beyond and proceeds to give him more than just the dream interpretation. Look at verse 33. And I've wondered, why did he say this? I think because God told him to say it. I think God directed him to say it, and he just said, all right, Lord, I'll keep talking. Says, now therefore let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up the 5th part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years, and let them gather all the food of those good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. And that food shall be for store to the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land perish not through the famine. The first half of what Joseph had to say was, here's the problem. The second half was, here's the solution. He did not owe Pharaoh a single solution. And it's interesting, what's missing in all of these verses, from verses 25 to 36? I just thought of this. What's missing? Anybody see Joseph asks to be made free from the prison? Yeah, nothing. He doesn't say, you want an interpretation of your dream? Give me my liberty and then I'll give it to you. Nothing. That's what I would have done something like that. I've been like, well, hey, I know the interpretation, but if you want it, man, you got to give me something first. He's stuck in prison. He's not there counting the days down. He's stuck in prison with no release date. But instead of saying, hey, let's barter here, God tells him, no, you're not asking for any of that. And he doesn't ask for it. He speaks only what I believe God laid on his heart to speak. I'm sure Joseph was praying when he's sitting there shaving his face and getting on clean clothes. I'm sure he was praying, going, Lord, what do you want me to say? I'm about to go before one of the most powerful men in Egypt, in the world, really. Egypt was one of the most powerful nations at this time. He's about to stand before one of the most powerful men. People look at him as a god, which, ma'am, I did look that up, by the way. A little side note. Pharaoh and king. King is just a man, and I don't know why it's interchangeable with in Egypt, the Pharaoh. They call him a king and a Pharaoh at the same time, because I know in the previous chapter it did that. But Pharaoh, is a little more like a king would be here, but a Pharaoh's a little bit more. It's a god in human flesh is what they looked at it. Yeah. So that's in the Egyptians' mind, a Pharaoh wasn't just the king, but he actually was a deity, a god deity. So, but he could have asked for that.
I thought it was strange that here Joseph is telling him what God said, that this is a message from God, and Pharaoh never questioned it.
Yep.
He didn't question it at all. And they don't even worship God.
Well, if you asked your magicians and wisest men of your court and nobody had an answer for you, but someone did, you're bound to listen to them. I love Pharaoh's response when Joseph gets done. It says, and the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And that's the thing. I think that right there, I'm sure Pharaoh was looking around at his other servants when Joseph got done. And he could tell that they were like, wow, this guy had wisdom. Joseph had pleasure from the men in the court. And I love his 38, his response there. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, can we find such a one as this, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? He saw something different in Joseph. And he's just like, can we find any better person than this? And just, all right, you're number two. You're number two. We'll get there here in a minute. Back in Proverbs chapter 3, verses 7 and 8, it says, be not wise in thine own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. It shall be health to thy navel and marrow to thy bones. Oh, we know Joseph was quick to depart from evil. When he was back home with his family, he'd see his brothers doing some evil deeds. He's like, I want no part of this. And he left. And he would report to his dad, say, hey, my brothers are being evil, Dad. And then when he was in Potiphar's house, when Potiphar's wife comes up, tries to seduce him, he constantly had to tell her, no, we can't do this great wickedness. It's like, you don't belong to me. I can't do this great wickedness against God. And man, he was quick to depart from evil. He had to actually flee just because she wouldn't leave him alone. She was consistent. She kept coming after him and coming after him. And it just got to a point where he had to just get out of there. And so he's quick to depart from evil. And man, seems to be a healthy man. God's taking care of him. Verses 9 says, honor the Lord with thy substance and with the first fruits of all thine increase. So shall thy barns be filled with plenty, and thy presses shall burst out with new wine. He honored God in everything he did. So God blessed all of his work that he did. I believe he honored God when he worked for Potiphar. So God blessed his work, and Potiphar had plenty, and Joseph rose to the ranks. If we look there, the previous chapter, Genesis chapter 40, and verse 8, when the men are trying to get a dream, their dreams interpreted, and they said unto him, we have dreamed a dream, and there's no interpreter of it. And Joseph said unto them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me them, I pray you. He was quick to turn those men back to God and say, hey, I'm not going to be able to interpret it, but God will give me the interpretation. He's letting them know that God's the one that interprets the dreams. And then in 41 verse 16, Pharaoh asks, is saying, hey, you can interpret dreams. Verse 16, and Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. He quickly lets Pharaoh know, hey, I cannot interpret a dream, but my God can. And he'll give it to me to give to you. Joseph directs men back to God for answers. And he honors God in everything that he does. And God blesses him for it. Then verses 11 and 12 says, my son, despise not the chastening of the Lord, neither be weary of his correction, for whom the Lord loveth, he correcteth, even as a father the son in whom he delighteth. This one, I was thinking about this. I was like, I wonder if Joseph, we do this as men. When bad things come into our life, normally our first assumption is, oh man, what did I do? And I don't know if Joseph ever had those thoughts. I mean, he was bound as a slave, and then he was bound into prison, and he has a guy come, a butler, and he asks the butler, hey, would you remember me? I'm here for no reason. I'm falsely accused. And the guy gets out 3 days later, and a month goes by, and Joseph's still there, and 2 months goes by, and Joseph's still there, and you're bound to get discouraged. And maybe he had thoughts of, man, God's chastening me. But he took it well. It's possible he had those thoughts. He was being corrected, but he received it as God working in his life to improve him. I don't know what his internal thoughts and discussions were, because we don't get that. God didn't write that down for us. But he's a man like us, and I imagine he was discouraged at times and wondering why God continued to allow that to happen to him. Next, Proverbs 21:1 says, the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord, as the rivers of water, he turneth it whithersoever he will. God moves and works in the hearts of men. We see this first with Pharaoh. Pharaoh is a heathen king. Pharaoh is so heathen, he calls himself Pharaoh because he thinks he's a god. Or at least the people think he's a god, but he doesn't correct them. And yet God chooses to use that man to help Joseph and get Joseph out of prison. He puts Joseph as number 2. That country, this is not a God-fearing country. Egypt has multiple gods. It's got the sun god, the moon god, the beef god.
The sheep god.
Yeah, all different kinds of gods. And yet God chooses to use him and move in and through his life to promote Joseph and to preserve the children of Israel. You know, we're going to see here in a few chapters all of Joseph's family comes down, and the nation is preserved in Egypt for a time. God prevents the wise men. All right, you got the wise men. He prevents them from knowing and understanding this dream. I mean, the reason Pharaoh's going to him is because I'm sure he's had other dreams in the past. And he's gone to the wise men and asked them for an interpretation. And they give it to him. And, oh man, that was such good advice. Need to keep these guys around some more. But now all of a sudden they can't figure this one out. And we look at it and we hear Joseph's interpretation. It's like, well, that was so easy. How come they couldn't think of that? Because God chose not to let them think of it. Same with the butler. Why did the butler forget about Joseph so quick? I mean, Joseph 3 days earlier had just told him, hey, you're going to get to go free. I imagine Joseph, he saw those guys that day. He probably saw them on the next day. He probably helped walk them out the gate, possibly, led them to the gate. Hey, I could imagine the jailer. Jailer doesn't want to go all the way back there. Hey, Joseph, go get me the chief baker and the butler. Pharaoh wants to see them. Okay. So he goes back and gets them, brings them to the jailer, and, I don't know if Joseph said something or gave him a look of like, hey, remember me when you leave. And not even 24 hours goes by and the butler gone. Why? Because God works in the lives of men. God chose to just, the name of Joseph, the face of Joseph, everything gone out of that butler's mind until 2 years later. 2 years goes by, now all of a sudden the butler's like, oh yeah, that guy. As he tells Pharaoh, hey, I remember my sins. I remember my wrong. What I should have done 2 years ago. There's this guy that can interpret dreams for you. He's in the prison house. I do wonder what when Pharaoh meets Joseph, I do wonder what he's thinking. Like, why is this guy in prison? I wonder if Pharaoh starts to question how many other people are in prison that maybe we shouldn't be in there. And when he's got Joseph. But God still does that today. God moves in the lives of men. God moves in our leaders, as wicked as they may be. Pharaoh was a wicked man. He wasn't righteous. There's men same way today. If God wants them to do something, he's going to get them to do something. And it's something we need to rest in the fact that, okay, God is in control. God allows them to do what they do. Or he directs them to do something else. Pray for them. We need to live a righteous life to hopefully influence those that we come in contact with. Just like Joseph did. Joseph, man, he got to influence Pharaoh greatly. And look what the nation did. I'll bet you any other man had Pharaoh put in charge, he probably would have told Pharaoh, we need to keep all our goods to ourselves. Let's not sell to anybody. Let the other nations starve themselves out. Whereas Joseph said, well, no, how about let's sell our goods to them. We have plenty of food. We have enough to feed our people. Let's feed the rest. They fed the world. People from all around were coming to Egypt to get food. You think about it. They came all the way from Canaan, his brothers. Which means that if they knew that going further north or east or south or what, they weren't gonna find any food. They said the only place they heard of food was coming down to Egypt. So that's a far-reaching famine. But God still works in the lives of men today. And he'll have them do what he wants them to do. Then Psalm 37. One more passage that fits with Joseph in his life. Joseph continued to trust in the Lord and God ends up giving him more than he desired. Psalm 37 says, "Fret not thyself because of evildoers, neither be thou envious against the workers of iniquity. For they shall soon be cut down like the grass and wither as the green herb. Trust in the Lord and do good, so shalt thou dwell in the land, and verily thou shalt be fed. Delight thyself also in the Lord, and he shall give thee the desires of thine heart. Commit thy way unto the Lord, trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. And he shall bring forth thy righteousness as the light, and thy judgment as the noonday. Rest in the Lord, and wait patiently for him. Fret not thyself because of him who prospereth in his way, because of the man who bringeth wicked devices to pass. Cease from anger and forsake wrath. Fret not thyself in any wise to do evil, for evildoers shall be cut off, but those that wait upon the Lord, they shall inherit the earth." That wasn't written for Joseph, but Joseph sure lived that way. He delighted himself in the Lord. He did not follow the way of evildoers. He wasn't like them. He didn't do what they did. He made sure to live righteously. And God ends up giving him more than what Joseph desired. If we were to look back in chapter 40, he tells the butler, says, "Man, say my name to Pharaoh so that I can be released." He wants to just get out of prison. He tells them that he was stolen away from his family. I imagine he was hoping to go back home, but I don't know. I always wonder why, would he have gone home had he gotten out? Back then, just been able to leave instead of the position he was given. Maybe he would have stayed in Egypt. I'm not sure. But he just wanted to be set free. But instead, God gives him so much more. God gave him a new position, number 2 in all of Egypt. God gives him a new family. He had an old family. God gives him a new family. He gets a beautiful bride that he gets to call his wife, and he marries her, and he ends up having children with her. God gives him a new purpose. He ends up building some great works to preserve the people, builds storehouses, and just amazing stuff. There's a waterway that is, the name of it is basically, it's tied with Joseph. Many of the people believe it's Joseph's River. And where it goes to, this person wrote about, it says the area that this canal goes into, I think maybe it's Joseph's Canal. It is a lush and fertile area, famed for its gardens, oranges, mandarins, peaches, olives, pomegranates, and grapes. It has been like this for well over 3,000 years and owes its lush fertility to a 200-mile-long canal which still conveys to it the waters of the Nile in a constant year-round flow. And it is an astonishing feat of engineering, which to this day is known throughout Egypt as the Bar Yusuf, the Joseph Canal. This has always been its name. Moreover, the people of Egypt are perfectly happy to tell you that it was built by the Joseph of the Bible, who once was Pharaoh's grand vizier. And then there's, along that area, I saw a video, some guy was showing these mounds, and it looks like dirt mounds today. But he walked up to one of them, and there was a chunk, and he's like, "Look, here, it's a brick. It's an old brick." And it was mud and straw packed together. Well, we know they did that. The Egyptians, they built that way, because we know in Exodus, that's what Israel was using, slime and straw for making brick. So it's possible Joseph showed them how to do that here in Genesis. And he had the Egyptians building these things. And they said I think there was like 1,000 or 2,000 storehouses above ground, but then there was also the same amount underground. And just these grand areas to put food. I mean, that had to be, Joseph put it somewhere. And this area is just covered with these storehouses. And it's believed that's the storehouses that Joseph built to provide for all of this. And so he had a new purpose, and he had to take care of the people of Egypt. The names that he gives his sons, he gets 2 sons just before the famine hits. The first one is Manasseh. Manasseh, it means, for God hath made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. So in 7 years, less than 7 years actually, he has it, God is just blessing him. He has it so good that he forgot all of his past. The first 13 years of Egypt are just forgotten. He doesn't think about it, he doesn't dwell on it, he's got it so good now. And then he's forgotten about his family, because God's given him a new family. And he's just loving on his wife, he's got kids to enjoy, and it's good. He's living his good life that God has blessed him. And then the next one is Ephraim. Says, for God hath caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. Egypt was a land of affliction for him. He was a slave. He was a prisoner. But no longer is it the land of his affliction. He's fruitful in it now. And he's seeing his labor become very profitable. All of the people of Egypt are looking to him. Here at the end of the chapter here, the years of famine come in, and the people rush to Pharaoh and cry to Pharaoh for bread. And what does Pharaoh say? Go to Joseph. He knows what to do. And I could just imagine Pharaoh's thinking, this guy just had you working. He had this whole plan. Don't come to me. He's the one who's got the plan. And so they all come to Joseph looking for help. And he's able to keep the country going and keep the people alive, because God just has continued to bless him. And it's a good reminder for us that, man, God, when things look bleak and dark, God has a plan. He knows where we are. He knows what's going on. He's not forsaken us. Just keep doing right. Keep trying to please him. And he'll show us his plan. He'll show us his will at some point. I'm sure Joseph for 13 years was going, God, what are you doing? But in less than 7 years, he saw it. He realized what the plan that God had for his life. And it was so good that he was able to forget all his struggle and turmoil. Anybody got any last comments or questions on that chapter? All right. Let's take our prayer list.